Next question up says, what exercise substitutions would you recommend for a weakness in the middle of the squat / trouble hitting depth, bench lockout, and deadlift lockout? Interesting question. So let's take these one by one. If you have trouble in the mid-range of your squat, first of all, this is exceedingly uncommon. Almost everyone has problems in the bottom of the squat, to the point where I would really like to see some video of a weakness in the middle of the squat, just because it's so uncommon. Lots of people exhibit a sticking point in the middle of the squat, but the weak range of motion is below that. It's always below that. And what we're looking for when we're assessing weak range of motion is where the bar slows down the most. And I mean, I don't want to say always, because there's always exceptions, but it's the vast majority of the time in the bottom, right after the lifter pops out of the hole, right after they get that stretch reflex rebound. That's where we see the weak range of motion start to creep in. I mean, it's super common, to the point where you can just look at a velocity curve and identify the squat based on that fact alone. So, I mean, it's possible that you're having trouble in the mid-range of your squat. It's exceedingly unlikely. However, if that was the case, I would recommend doing pauses at the weak range of motion. If you have it available, possibly incorporating some band work and some chain work, but not aggressive. It can't be aggressive, especially for a mid-range weakness. We're looking for 15% of your 1 rep max in whatever load accommodation that we're using. You can also do some movements like pin squats or box squats at the weak range of motion. However, we've got to be careful with that, especially if there is trouble with hitting depth, which is really your next question. If you have trouble hitting depth, then I find training the bottom of the squat is most effective. Things like pin squats and pause squats are really useful. Pause squats will help you get comfortable in the bottom of the squat, in addition to building strength there. A lot of the reasons why people have trouble hitting depth is that there's no strength there, so their body doesn't want to go there. So pause squats can help with that. You're going to have to humble yourself a little bit and make yourself go to that range of motion so that you can pause in the bottom at a legal depth. Pin squats can be helpful because if you set the pins to a legal depth, then it's a really good depth check for you. So that can be useful as well. If your bench is weak at the lockout, you should do similar things to what you would do for any other lift. We're going to train that range of motion. Now that can include partials like board work and pin presses. That can also include, again, some light accommodation stuff like 15-20% of your 1 rep max. The reason we don't go heavy on load accommodation is because, especially with lockout issues, going heavy on bands and chains limits the amount of plate weight we can use, which inhibits your force production in other ranges of motion just because the weight is so light. Deadlift lockout is interesting because in terms of the development of the actual movement pattern, it's pretty simple. We're looking at block pulls or rack pulls mostly, possibly reverse band deadlifts or deadlifts with bands or chains, things like that. Some load accommodation can be helpful for a deadlift lockout weakness, but a lot of it's going to be partial range of motion. With the deadlift in particular, there's a big role for supplemental exercises. With a lockout weakness in the deadlift, 9 times out of 10, it's spinal erectors that need to be developed. So we would highlight that weak muscle group with our supplemental exercises and go from there.